All right, to graph functions, you need to start with an XY chart. All functions can be graphed using an XY chart. So to create an XY chart, you simply plug values into the function to get Y values out. So I'm going to stick X's in to get Y's out, and then the X and Y together is going to create the points that I'm going to plot. So let's start with just an example. Create an XY chart and plot the points on the graph for the given domain. So all that means, the given domain sounds really scary and really hard to do, but all that means is that we're going to give you the X values we want you to use. So we're going to do f of x equals 2x minus 5. And I want to know what this graph looks like when x equals -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. The graph doesn't exist outside of these 5 x values. So we're not going to be connecting these dots. This is going to be a discrete graph because -1.5, -1/2, positive 1.5, none of those numbers exist. It's just these whole numbers and only those 5 numbers. So I create the XY chart, I put my X, I put my function, the Y, and then my XY points that I'm going to get out of it. So for this, I'm going to put in my domain, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. Right here are my X values because I know those are the X values I'm going to use. I set up my function without the X's and then I just wrote in the X's and then I did the math. Your calculator will do this for you. You can use your calculator to go 2 parentheses -2 close the parentheses -5 and it'll give you the numbers. So if I have a -2 over here in the X's and a -9 over here in the Y's, that means that my point is -2, -9. This point is -1, -7. I put in -1 and I got out -7. Over here I put in 0 and I got out -5. I put in 1, I got out -3. I put in 2 and I got out -1. These are the points that you plot on your graph. So -2, -9. -1, -7, 0, -5, 1, -3, and 2, -1. When they're plotted, you're done. Because the domain was provided as 5 individuals number, you have a discrete graph and you would not connect the points. So let's take a look at what happens when you do connect the points. So when a domain is not provided, what you're going to assume is that the domain contains all real numbers, and it's really all real numbers that make the graph defined. You're going to get into undefined graphs at some point, but it's not going to be in this video or in this chapter in our class. So you're just going to assume that it's all real numbers and you get to pick any x values you want. So again, here's another example. Your instructions: create an XY chart and a graph for the function. Your function is f of x equals x squared minus 4. Now you may not be familiar with graphing something with x squared, but if you've got your XY chart, you're going to be fine. So I put a special note over here. Because there's no domain provided, you can pick the points. You're going to want to start with -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. You need to consider those points your best friends. Those are the ones you're always going to use to start with until you know more about different kinds of graphs. So we're going to start with -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. And for any graph you're ever going to graph on your own, if you don't know where to start with those 5 x values. So I plug them in over here, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2 under my x column. Under my function column, I wrote my function without an x and I plugged in my x values. So where this was x squared minus 4, I just put open parentheses squared minus 4 because I knew I was going to change that x value each time. So after I put this in my calculator to do the math, and be very careful to put your parentheses around your whole x value, including that negative sign, or your calculator is going to give you the wrong answer. I got 0, so -2, 0. Plug in this line and I got -3. So -1 gave me -3. 0 gave me -4. 1 gave me -3. And 2 gave me 0. Because it's okay for y values to repeat, this is still a function. So I put a note on here, use your calculator for this to give you those. Okay? Plot the points and connect the dots. So I plotted my points. Here is -2, 0. -1, -3, 0, -4, 1, -3, and 2, 0. And I connected my dots, making this pretty shape, which is called a parabola. And I put an arrow on each end of the line. Remember, my domain is all real numbers, so it's all the fractions in between here, but it's also all the numbers going to negative infinity and positive infinity. It's going up forever, so I put my arrows on the end. One more example. Okay, here are your instructions. Create an XY chart and graph the function. Here's my function. Here's my XY chart with those numbers I pick. Plug them all in. Use your calculator. Here are my points. Plot them and connect the dots. Same thing every time.